Doc Anderson here. Today I'm going to talk about an area that is near and dear to my heart, the Weedon Island Preserve in eastern Pinellas County. It is an approximately 10-mile long county preserve, including mangrove wetlands and pine hammock. When I first moved to St. Petersburg in 1989, Weedon Island was under immediate threat for commercial development for not only a shopping center and housing development, but even a rumored prison. My neighbors, Getting and Roy Harrell, were spearheading a move to get the island and its legacy preserved for posterity. Although I was only a foot soldier in this movement, I am one of the few surviving members. The hard work that my neighbors and the members of the Southwest Florida Water Management District put in to get this island purchased by the county and preserved will never be forgotten. In 1993, the county agreed to sign a 100-year lease to keep Weedon Island as a park. As part of the compromise made, a museum and boardwalk were put in, and a fishing pier and kayak launch were also added later. I will always be in gratitude of the hard work of those who made this happen. I am now going to lead you on a hiking video tour of the preserve from the ground level. Doc Anderson here on top of the fire tower at Weedon Island Preserve. If you look out, you can see the entire length of the 10 miles of Weedon Island Preserve. In 1989, this entire preserve was going to be sold to developers for both a shopping mall, housing development, and even a prison. Luckily, my neighbors Getting and Roy Harrell enlisted a group of us to help get the county to purchase and lease this property and make it a preserve. I am forever grateful for Roy and Paul to do this, and I was just a mere foot soldier on the ground of that movement, but we have preserved this land in Pinellas County for at least 100 years. And as there is not much green space in Pinellas County, we have to preserve every bit we get. You can see downtown Tampa in the distance, and then down here you can see downtown St. Petersburg in the distance. And it's really critical to have this habitat preserved for the estuary of Tampa Bay and for the breeding ground for all the game fish and for the manatees and dolphins. The gopher tortoise is another unique native species to the Weedon Island Preserve. Originating 60 million years ago, it is one of the oldest living species on the planet. Gopher tortoises can live to be over 90 years old, and they are land tortoises, an important distinction from water turtles, as gopher tortoises do not swim and have burrows scattered throughout the Weedon Island Preserve. These tortoise burrows are a key element to the Weedon Island ecosystem. Their burrows can be up to 40 feet long and 10 feet wide, and many other species, including frogs, snakes, mice, rodents, invertebrates, use their burrows for habitat. to gopher tortoise existence is loss of habitat, which is why it is important that their living area in Weedon Island Preserve be maintained. This is the Getting Nature Trail at Weedon Island. Again, my neighbor that helped get the county to preserve this park. And my other neighbor, Roy Harrell, and the various members of the Southwest Florida management and other people that were instrumental in this movement to keep this park from development back in 1989. This is the rock honoring my neighbor, Paul Getting, who was one of the leaders of the movement to get this preserve, keep it from development in 1989. Paul led a small group of neighbors and members of the Southwest Florida Water Management District in getting the county to preserve this preserve for sign a 100-year lease. Anyway, I'm grateful to Paul. This is the boardwalk trail at Weedon Island Preserve. There are several miles of boardwalk traversing the mangrove swamps, and certainly an enjoyable walk. The most dramatic bird sighting in Weedon Island Preserve is the roseate spoonbill, which first-time visitors frequently confuse with the flamingo. Spoonbills were hunted to the verge of extinction for their feathers in the 1930s. And then a conservation effort led to the preservation of the species, and they are now a frequent visitor to the Weedon Island Preserve. The side-to-side motion of their beaks when feeding in the water is the Weedon Island is a distinctive feature of the spoonbill, in addition to their pink plumage. An Indian shell mound that are found throughout Weedon Island Preserve. The prehistoric Indians here have numerous shell mounds containing pottery, tools, and shells, and as part of their food. There also were several Indian burial mounds on this island. Legend has it that the Native Americans came to Weedon Island Preserve for protection from hurricanes. I've known about this legend since I moved to Pinellas County in 1989, and since that time we have not taken a direct hit, so a lot of my neighbors say the legend is true, and there's an occult low high pressure steering the storms from a direct hit on Pinellas County, and the Native Americans knew this from the early times. So in general, mangroves, however, do an excellent job, as it shows here, in preventing damage from storm surge, and are critical to preserve the estuaries in this environment. And that's why at my house I have a large group of mangroves rather than a seawall to protect my yard and house. As you can see by the sign here, Weedon Island has had over 7,000 years of Native American history, and it's one of the oldest archaeologic sites in the state of Florida. The armadillo is a prehistoric looking shell-covered insectivore that frequents the Weedon Island Preserve, particularly along the Boy Scout trail. They can be identified rustling in the bushes as they stick their snout in the ground looking for ants and other insects. If you can imagine the early Spanish explorers Ponce de Leon and Hernando de Soto getting out of their boats in their armor and having to transect this mangrove swamp on foot with mosquitoes and swamp, it seems incredibly difficult. The Boy Scout Trail is named for the Eagle Scouts who worked very hard in carving this dirt trail through the mangrove forest. These Eagle Scouts' hard work and planning contributed to the beautiful dirt trail that traverses the mangrove swamp the length of Weedon Island. Here you can see a midden shell mound from Native Americans popping up in the middle of the mangrove swamp here. You could see the large amount of Spanish moss hanging from the mangroves, obviously native to Florida, and adding to the ambiance of the Boy Scout Trail. We're now entering a different habitat on Weedon Island Preserve. This is kind of a pine hammock here, and this is a longleaf pine, which is a fire-dependent pine tree found in the lowlands of Florida. You can see that's extremely old pine. Weedon Island has a versatility of habitat here. We're in the pine uplands here in Weedon Island. You can see multiple large longleaf pine trees here and a large amount of saw palmetto. It's a different ecosystem than the mangrove swamp. Part of the agreement in 1993 we made with the county, this was opened to the public as a natural history center and cultural center. It's a nice museum. This canoe on Weedon Island is over 1,000 years old. The midden is the shell mound from the Native Americans that we saw earlier out on the preserve. Manatees and sea cows are a frequent sight in the estuary bay waters in and around Weedon Island. Spend any time in a kayak or on one of the fishing piers on Weedon Island and you are likely to see the gentle giant of Tampa Bay. It particularly loves the seagrass beds that surround Weedon Island Preserve. This is the hike to Lookout Point now. We've almost transected the entire width of Weedon Island. This is Lookout Point. We have now transected across the width of Weedon Island, and if you look through the trees there, you can see MacDill Air Force Base and parts of Tampa. Let's go up here a little bit. Here we have a nice view of the impenetrable mangrove swamp forest. Once again, the Spanish conquistadors could have encountered had they landed their ships here. Of all the things I've done in my long and distinguished medical career, the minor role I had in helping to preserve Weedon Island has greater meaning to me. When the Weedon Island lease expires in approximately 60 years, hopefully future generations will be able to watch this video and once again, if necessary, help Weedon Island to be preserved into the future forever. The importance of green space in a densely populated county like Pinellas County cannot be underestimated. The best way to combat global warming is by preserving trees and vegetation, as these are carbon dioxide sinks and are much better effective tools at combating global warming than the series of electric vehicles and windmills and other entities. It is important for man's future on the planet that we preserve as much green space and plant as many trees as possible. Enjoy the outdoors. Doc Anderson.